Welcome to Whitewater Leadership. My name is George Hutchinson and I'm Chief Exec and founder of River Effra. River Effra is a crisis and reputational risk advisory firm, and I've spent the best part of the last 30 years advising business leaders and leaders of organisations and charities when they're facing into major risks and systemic threats and crises. And I'm joined today by my co-host, Polly Neate. Polly.
Thanks, George. Thanks, everyone, for listening to the podcast. I'm Polly Neate. I'm an expert advisor for River Effra, and I also convene the Social Insights panel for the Future Governance Forum. I'm really excited to be co-hosting this series of podcasts which look at what I think are some of the most significant challenges facing leaders in any sector, as George said. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the wisdom of some of the most well-respected leaders in the charity sector. As a former chief executive myself of Shelter and Women's Aid, I've definitely had my share of some Whitewater experiences in my time.
Today's guest is Simon Blake. Simon is Chief Executive of Stonewall, formerly of Mental Health First Aid England, and of young person sexual health charity Brooke. Simon, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming, Simon.
Absolute pleasure. Always good to talk.
Brilliant. Before we get into the detail of the conversation, we handle and help organisations, and particularly have seen acute challenges affecting the charitable and the third sector and public sector organisations. And it'd just be good to understand what you think really good risk leadership is in a world that has become more polarised and more challenging.
So it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about the word risk, where your brain goes. Do you go to the risk register? Do you think about the challenges that you might get on the street or in conversation? But if you just turned it on its head, I guess it's what does it take to be courageous around social justice in the sort of sector that I work in? And it's a question which I think lots of us are asking ourselves. How do you ensure that you stay true to your principles and values whilst learning, whilst understanding, whilst taking into account that we can't all think the same way, and at the same time do the right thing for your beneficiaries? So I don't know that I know the answer, but I think if we look through everything through a risk lens, then it's really easy to do nothing. And so for me, the question is, what do you do? How do you do it? And how do you keep on trying to move forward? As you say, in a world that's more polarized in the noise, but not necessarily in the thinking. And it's do we make sure that, how do we make sure that we add to the messy middle rather than form the polarization is probably the question which I would keep asking myself.
I wanted to ask you about personal leadership qualities, because some might say that it's quite courageous to take on the role of leading Stonewall within such a polarised culture. And I've always really respected you as a courageous, I hate the word authentic, but I'm going to use it anyway, authentic leader. But you must, as well as those things, there must be something in you that is really, really robust. What is it about you that enables you to be a leader that can withstand that level of public criticism?
So without being trite, I think you do have to go back and think about childhood and actually how your brain developed. So I had one of those very lucky childhoods before mobile phones in the countryside, where as long as we were back before dark, we were allowed to go and do what we like. And we did a lot of stuff. And I do genuinely think that enabled my brain to manage risk. And so it's so easy to think about how do you build resilience, but I go right back to childhood and what did we learn? I think for Stonewall particularly, when the job came up, I wasn't looking for a job and I wasn't looking for this job, but I saw the advert and I was like, I remember the day that I found out that Stonewall was being launched. I was 15. And the change that it made in that particular moment, because I was like, oh my goodness, these people are willing to stand up and do something for me. And of course, I didn't know anybody else in Cornwall at that point that was gay. And how much influence it's had on my life, whether it's getting married, the ability to choose whether or not to have children, all those sorts of things. And my desire is to ensure that no child ever grows up, with the same fear and prejudice that many of us of our generation did. So for me, there's a very clear purpose, and it taps right into everything. People talk about success. I just want to leave this world knowing that I've tried to make it a bit better. And so going to Stonewall felt to me like this was just full circle really. That 15-year-old child was going, go on, go and see what you can do about it. And I guess the thing that we never talk about is what we do outside of work. So I have a horse, and I have a very strong hobby, which means that at some points in the day I'm thinking, how am I going to sit to this trot, or how am I going to get over to the other side of that fence? And I'm not able to think about anything else. And I do think that we have to give our brain a rest if we want our brain to look after us. And then I've also just been lucky. There is an element of luck in this. I don't get anxious. I don't worry about things which I don't have any control over. So a combination of deliberate action to look after yourself, my experience as a child, and then knowing that there are some things you just can't do. And you talked about Twitter. I've also stopped doing very much social media. It is much more sort of like LinkedIn, and then stuff for friends and a little bit of work stuff. But I do think that moment where we were all trying to believe that we could change the world through social media is definitely one which I've moved on a bit from.
Yeah, I really hear you talking about the horse riding. That really resonates with me with my rock climbing. I think it fulfills exactly that purpose. So I really hear that and understand that. So I guess my next question is, so you've talked about that personal ability to withstand a lot of stress and a high profile role that attracts criticism. How do you then translate that into the organisation that you lead? Because, it's an organisation that comes in for a lot of criticism.
I think probably the one thing I should have said in the last group was also having good people around you, good friends, good partner, good family, all of those things. Good in that they know when to ask you, and good when they know to just say, not going to talk about that tonight. We're going to go and do something completely different. So when it translates into the organisation, I think there is something about how we want the world to be, and then how you want your organisation to play a role in getting there. And I'm really clear, and have always been really clear, that this isn't about trying to get everybody to believe and think the same thing. It's about trying to create a world in which we can all live and get along with each other and find ways to do that. And I think depending on your view of the world does depend how you then lead the organisation and how you want the organisation to be. And I definitely haven't got it right yet. I've only been at Stonewall for a year, but I think in publishing our new strategy, we're really clear about pragmatism. We were really clear about the importance of engaging in conversation. And for me, there's something about how do you invite people into a conversation. And one of the big criticisms that Stonewall obviously gets is that we weren't willing to debate, that we weren't willing to tell people, to listen to what people had said. Now, whether or not I agree that that's always been the case, or whether I disagree, doesn't actually matter. If people perceive that to be true, then it has to be true in some way. And so you've therefore got to show something a bit different in terms of your body language. And I've in everything I've done said I want to engage in conversation. What that has also meant is some of our biggest critics have said that means you've got to come and talk to me. And actually that doesn't mean necessarily you've got to go and talk to them. It means that we've got to work out where are the best places to be having those conversations in order to stay true to where you want to be in the conversation. And I do think there are generational differences. We don't talk enough about generational differences, and there are also political views about how you achieve change, and theories of change don't actually quite capture necessarily that political view in terms of individuals' belief and responsibility. And I remember when I started at Stonewall, there were lots of people who said, but this is how we think the world needs to change. And there will be some organisations who absolutely agree with you. But the way that Stonewall has always done it is being, inside the room, having conversations with people. They are, incredibly difficult. And I just say in a polarised world, that's even more important, it feels to me.
Absolutely.
And I guess that gets to a point where, and it's absolutely not to diminish it, in a way, having somebody like a Lawrence Fox come at you where they're sitting very far away from where your position is, and actually it's aggressive and difficult and you end up having to sue them, is one thing. But we are living in a world where I would describe it, and when we're working with organisations, particularly in your sector, sometimes you end up with sort of weaponised values from your own side. And that can be even more difficult in a way to deal with, because actually you all might have the same end objective, but you can internalise it to a degree in which actually you end up fighting each other. Have you found that at all?
But the bit about this has to be, where is the shared values, and how do we talk about the fact that we can have different tactics? And sometimes I think it becomes too easy to think it's one or the other. And of course, part of the joy of getting older is you realise it's not one or the other. It's how do you make the most of both. And when I was at the National Union of Students, one of the things that I would say so often is, if only you would realise that if you're protesting outside and you're inside, then actually you've got the best of both worlds, rather than saying it's all this or it's all that. And that's true within the LGBT Q plus sector at the moment. And I think it's how do you hold on to the fact that you've got shared values, and then enough trust that people will believe that the way that you are doing it, you're acting with integrity. But I do think that that it's very easy to judge the lack of trust and the fighting within, but at a time when people are really hurting. Actually, it's so easy to not trust. And and of course, I also, within the community, I sit with the greatest level of benefit of all the changes that happened so far. A white gay man who's very definitely now middle class, even if that's not how I feel or thought when I left Cornwall. And so it's easy, therefore, for people to say, and it's all right for him. And I hear that and I recognise it, and I think it's how do you take that into conversation? How do you show in your actions, and how also do you just shrug it off sometimes? And say, I recognise that at this moment in time, that trust isn't going to be there. I'm hoping that I'm winning. Hopefully in time, history will show.
What you're saying reminds me of when I was chief executive at Women's Aid, of the women's sector, where you've got a huge number of people directly affected by violence against women and girls. I mean, arguably every woman is. And a lot of anger, fair enough as well, and a real feeling of being oppressed, of being othered. And the amount of times, even now, I hear people say, oh, the women's sector, they just can't get on with each other. And I understand why people say that, but also it's a very partial picture, and it doesn't understand that trauma that people working in that sector have. And it must be a bit the same for you, in the sense that people are, not only are people passionate about the cause, but they're personally directly affected by discrimination and prejudice, and that creates a very different relationship with the cause, doesn't it? And I'm very interested in how you navigate that. It's not something I feel I necessarily I feel quite self-critical about how I navigated that at Women's Aid, although I did my best. But I'm interested in how you navigate that.
Yeah. I can also, criticize myself, enormously about it, and inevitably get it wrong, certainly for other people. And I think it's that bit about trusting that I'm doing my best, and I'll keep doing it my best in those moments and in those circumstances until I know better and all those sorts of things. But it is the bit which I'm really clear about and have always been, is that when you're at work, and I'm able to do this, when I'm at work, I'm in service to others. I don't ever sit and look and think this is about me. And I don't know whether, again, that's about the amount of a privilege or experience, or the beauty of my brain. But for some people, it will clearly be, particularly at grassroots, might be volunteering, might be doing this in addition to another job, is not. It is about them, and that's what drives the fire and the passion in the belly, and makes it so brilliant, but also makes it complicated. It's why burnout and stress and anger and disappointment, is so evidently there. But perhaps we don't talk about this enough, and perhaps that is part of this next process that we've got to be through and to go through. So when I was at the National Children's Bureau, I ran the Volatile Substance Abuse Network, and lots of parents will establish a charity in their child's name as part of the grieving process, which is brilliant, but it also is really complicated. And yet when you try to broach that, it can be seen as a position of weakness to say, we're actually doing this for ourselves now, and there will be a moment when it comes to being handed on. And that then falls into the, when does a charity close down? And I've seen lots of charities closing down perhaps before their time the last couple of years, but there was one that should, in my view, it's always difficult to say should, isn't it? But should have, in my view, said, do you know what, our time has come. Yes, it's difficult to find money. Yes, the circumstances are challenging, but these are the 15 things that we have done, and the world is no longer as it was when we were set up. And that is, I think, is reflective of a culture in which a charity goes on forever, rather than a charity should be say, we've cracked it, we've done it. And so for me, it's all part of that sort of sense of, how do we acknowledge what drives people there, how funding arrives at a particular time, how we help people through the emotional experience of doing it so that we can grow and not think trauma, emotion, passion is a weakness, but actually see it as a strength. But any strength, of course, has a difficult side, and joy and pain live so closely together.
Absolutely. And so we have a team of performance psychologists as well here to try and help leadership make better decisions under pressure. And what they can tell from the scientific data is that pressure creates an overplayed strength. And when we walk into charities with risks and challenges and maybe even a major crisis, oftentimes part of the challenge, and I think you've really touched on this, is how do you get alignment across your own internal audiences when everybody has their own core, really valued cause, reason for joining? This isn't just a job, it's a mission, but it's a mission interpreted quite often by my own personal experience of what that mission looks like. And then actually having everybody face in the same direction is hard. And I think if the objective can be really clear and the mission is really clear, it makes it a bit easier.
The objective, the mission, and the route through which you believe you're going to achieve it. So often we're clear on the mission and the objective, but not clear that, and in this organisation, that means we do this. And I think that so often in charities,
we do this and we don't do that sometimes.
It would be great, wouldn't it, to say, well, we don't do as much as what we do, but also that bit about there is only one way of doing things, rather than, we recognise that there are this is an ecosystem. This is, because most of us in the charity sector are part of a movement, whether we define it as a movement, whether we define it as a cause. And so we will only ever be playing one small part of that. And being able to be clear about that and being able to say to people feels like a really important bit. Quite jealous of performance psychologists. I was supposed to be a psychologist, but I fell in love, missed the deadline, never became one, but it sounds like a great job.
Good reason for missing a deadline. Anyway,
Well, it's fun at the time.
Right. We'll draw a bell over that one. So thinking about the risk of how you and your organisation are perceived externally, it sounds like you're saying that almost as long as you're secure in what you're trying to do, you can tolerate almost any level of external criticism. Or
Personally.
Well, no, the organisation,
Yeah.
I suppose. I'm thinking about organisational risk now.
Yeah.
And, how much does external, I'm using the word criticism, but I mean criticism, trolling, cancellation, real big campaigns waged against an organisation externally, which we have seen examples of in the sector. Is it true that if you stick to your values, that can't ultimately spell doom for your organisation?
I mean, nothing is forever, is it? We've seen, some of the big high street stores, which we assumed would be forever, that are not there forever. And so I don't believe that anything can withstand everything, but I do think that clarity and sticking to purpose, and consistency is probably a really important thing in that. And actually, where some of the criticisms that I've seen us get, and also other organizations, is when people don't understand what you're doing, and people believe that you're doing something differently, and they'll either love it or they'll not like it. And then when you do something differently again, they either love it or not. And so you then get it. Whereas, so take one that I continue to support, I absolutely just think I'm going to continue to support even if it gets really difficult. But partly that's because they say, of course it's going to get difficult. Of course people are going to take us. And we're clear about when are they operating on the edge of where people believe we should be, and when are they right in the mainstream, whereas others may or may not agree with that. But for me, there's a level of consistency, and I'm not naming them because I just think there's always
absolutely
not helpful to do so.
I think within that space as well then, and one of the things I've seen in the room, and we sort of collect the biases and behaviours of leadership teams when they're under real challenge in the public sector and the third sector, and there are two that really strike me. One is just persecution bias. Do you understand how hard our world is, what we're trying to do, how important it is? And the second one, kind of combined with that one, is crusade bias. Our mission is so important, sometimes the how we get there is flexed a little bit. Yeah. And for me, almost then, what that opens up for the critic is the ability to be able to say, that is a problem. Yeah. And you sit there with leadership teams and they sometimes say, no, it isn't, we're all under attack. And you are under attack, but you've maybe left a small mistake burning, and that gives an opening rather than fix the hygiene factors and then campaign brilliantly for it.
And all of that I absolutely agree with. And I think just to sort of correct, people can create truth. And that doesn't have to be the people who support you that can create truth. And I've been really struck by that for a number of charities. And when people talk about Stonewall and no debates, like, okay, so there are lots of different versions of the truth. And I think we have to be alive to the fact that there are lots of different versions to the truth. But probably for me, if there's one thing I hope I never do, but sure that I will, it would be to say everyone else is wrong and I'm right. And even if I believe I'm absolutely right in the mission, the question you have to ask yourself is, what are they seeing that I'm not? Yeah. And so when you think about the diversity, equity and inclusion conversation, sadly imported from America, but it's a conversation which is there nonetheless. There are some things that we have to listen to and understand and then decide consciously whether to rectify or not. And if you make a conscious decision, then hopefully you've done it based on analysis of what you understand the situation to be from across a range of different lenses, rather than just what you think from your own perspective. But the bit which, if I go right back full circle to your piece about the sector sort of piece, what sometimes when we've gone, okay, we're going to try to find a way to enable us to just reach across the aisle a little bit in order to, perhaps get people to think, okay, we can enter the conversation. And then some people who are on your side saying, okay, you sold out. And then it's like, okay, so who have I lost the support of and who have I gained the support of? Yeah. And how much and how often can I or should I do that? And for what length of time? And I think these are all the things which, increasingly, as the world becomes more polarized, but also the systems and structures by which we understand how we create influence, shift and change, that relationships and that acute awareness of what's going on has to be done. But the worst thing I think we can do is just bunker down. Bunker down once you've known how you're getting out. Don't just bunker down. There does seem to be a loss of narrative overall, whether that's narrative about where the voluntary sector is, whether that's narrative about overseas aid, whether that's narrative around housing, whether that's a narrative about migration, whether it's narrative around your conversion practices. And as you sit and you say, well, that's where it feels like there are some losses in narrative. We used to know that if you got on a Today programme in the morning, you had an exclusive in The Guardian, something in The Times, something in The Mirror and The Sun, that it was likely that a significant percentage of the population was going to do it. If you get on Newsround as well, brilliant. Whereas now, you've got no idea that somebody who saw you last week is going to have any clue about it. So you've got no chance to build. And so I think it feels, and that's combined with, I don't produce a long report. We only listen to 17 seconds and we only read 3 bullet points. So that depth of understanding, and I genuinely think, I know I'm worse when I don't have that depth of understanding. So even if no one else reads it, I need to know where we are in order that we can really hope to make that narrative shift.
Makes it much, much harder though, doesn't it, to it's very difficult to counter somebody shooting arrows at you when, I don't know, what you're trying to do is float a hot air balloon up or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of very, very complicated to make the case now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm asking you by this, but I suppose I guess I'm thinking about running an organisation where you are in an area that is kind of comes under the category, and I absolutely hate this word, but comes under the category of woke.
Yeah.
You're in an area that is kind of lambasted for being woke. How that is such a kind of stupid umbrella. And what you're talking about is an intelligent argument.
Yeah. Thank you.
How do those two things reconcile? And then what's the risk that you're running? How do you get your board to understand your approach and be comfortable with the level of risk that you might be running? When it just seems so difficult, and you're right about, that communicating as a charity has changed beyond recognition in both of our time in the sector. Lots of people haven't caught up with that, but you're absolutely right about where it is now.
Yeah.
All of that together then means it's very, very difficult to manage the impact of people slagging you off.
Yep.
How do you get your board happy with that and your staff happy with that and everyone on the same page?
I guess it's naming it, isn't it? It's talking about it. It's seeing that as part of the work. It's not saying, here's the press release, sign it off. It's thinking through in advance what are going to be, who is it most important that is hearing this?
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of conversation about, are we talking to the community? Are we talking to people who are consuming services which will positively impact the community? Are we talking to policymakers? And every time that that there will potentially be somebody who will comment underneath it, who clearly is trying to discredit, I think that bit about the challenging the messenger, trying to undermine the credibility of the messenger at a time when you're told you need to be more authentic and go into personal communication. So one of the things which I think it was Kate Collins in COVID time, who runs Teenage Cancer Trust, said, we're in a period where there is no right decision, there is the least bad decision. Yeah. And when it comes to this sort of communication, without putting a negative frame on it, because I'm all for optimism, that it is something about how do you just go in and put your head down and know, having done all of that analysis, that you're going to be able to please and influence some people and absolutely infuriate and not influence positively, at least, some others. And perhaps that wasn't the conversation that you had before because you thought you were placing in The Guardian or going to the Telegraph or whatever it was.
Just within that space then, because I think that it's a really well-made point, and actually it's almost, we'd talk about it as just risk-based methodology, which is, if we do this, what do these different people or audiences think of it?
Yeah.
And are we okay with that? And if we're not okay with that, maybe we change what we do. So, reputational risk is only ever secondary to actually it's what people think of the things that you do as a leader and as an organisation. But if before you do it, you've considered the different outcomes that might come at you, and you then go, yeah, that's what we're here for. It furthers our mission. It will upset this group of people, but they're already upset. And actually, given what we are here and how we deliver on our purpose, we actually have to go and do that.
And I think your last point is the one I just come back to each time, how we deliver on our purpose. Because anybody can say that's the wrong way, is that this is how we do it. And we've had lots of conversations with the board, which is this is how we do it, to the point that they would trust. And we've had lots of conversations with staff, actually, because staff would question it. So we talked about marginalised communities, including LGBTQ plus communities, or including trans and non-binary people, rather than immediately going to remind people that there is a sense of solidarity, because we know from strategic communications that often people think it's only those. So I think there are lots of different ways to do it, but the most important thing has to be about understanding this is how we're going to do it, so that when somebody asks you, you can say, I did it this way because this is how we agree, this is in line with our values. And also, I got it wrong, is an okay thing. Say, there is no shortage of ways to get it wrong. And when you're in a world where people want you to get it wrong, there are people trying to ensure that you get it wrong, or to make it sound as though you've got it wrong. And in that, you do have to, it's not for the faint-hearted, just say, that there is no easy way to say this, that you do have to be in a position where you're able to make peace with, what other people think about you, and to also create peace for yourself. In the world that we live in now, how do we hold true to our beliefs and our values and create peace for ourselves? Feels like a really important question.
How do we behave in the world?
Because that's within our gift. Ultimately, how we behave is within our gift. How the rest of the world behaves isn't within our gift.
Yeah. And I remember having that conversation with colleagues at Shelter, actually, about, but I can't help it because I feel angry. And it's like, you feel angry, but you can help what you do about it.
Yeah. No, that's the...
And
we have to take responsibility for that. That's the... and that doesn't mean that sometimes we won't feel angry and sometimes make mistakes, because...
What's to be angry about, guys? Let's be honest.
It's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to make that influence how you behave bad and say that justifies bad behaviour.
But I think that there are so many layers to all of this, as always, aren't there? And we could probably talk for days about it. But if I think about, in my 20s, when we went to work and we didn't have... I didn't have a single email, and when I first started, you had a shared email address, but you didn't have a mobile phone in the evening, and you went out more after work, and so you laughed more, and so that metabolizing the anger. So by the next morning, you were back with a spoonful of honey with it, and you could do it. Whereas that sort of sense of people being able to contact you at 9 o'clock at night, our own fault. We can put it down, but people are. And that might be, when you're in the middle of having a birthday party or whatever it is, and you think, how dare you do that at that time, when actually these are all things which are within our gift. But I do genuinely believe that something about optimism and joy and courage all have to be part of the conversation. Otherwise, we end up in how are we managing the negatives rather than how are we over-indexing and up-indexing the positives.
Yeah. Avoiding that cycle of despair in a way, and actually saying, because you started there actually, and it was personal to you, but to be able to say the world has got a lot better for you from where you grew up, and actually the level of prejudice and the challenge and the barriers that existed for you. Now, that's not to say the journey is anywhere near done, but it's nice to hear progress as well as challenge.
Exactly, and this is the bit, isn't it? It's which way you look, on the world. So, because part of me in the media, but don't you know that there is still this that we need to do.
And I was trying not to in any way diminish it.
But it's all of that sort of, we're always 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that is the nature of doing this work.
Simon, that is a brilliant point to finish on. I think that kind of that sense of optimism, that sense of hope. It might be a very challenging world at the moment. It might be more polarised, and there's a lot of politics in everybody's lives and actually how they navigate it. But without that hope, it feels like actually you're not giving people that pathway to be able to think about the future.
Yeah, and I saw Jacinda Ardern speak a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really magic moment for me. So basically she said, optimism can be seen as naivety, but actually it takes moral courage, because if you're not optimistic, you're saying you accept what currently is. And if we accept what is, we're not challenging ourselves and others around us. So to your point about hope, that, for me, this is really important at a time when it's difficult, when there's all sorts of challenges, as we've discussed, then, have optimism, take moral courage, and we'll find a way through.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. If you're listening and you thought that this was an interesting discussion, please do share on your socials and engage with us at #WhitewaterLeadership. Thank you for joining us, and Polly.
Yeah, thank you from me as well. And do follow me and River Effra on LinkedIn to get news of all podcast episodes as they drop.